To Z1, discussion and direction regarding the 2014 federal legislative agenda. Jason, good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jason Stoltzfus with Administration. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about our federal legislative agenda. Before I get into that, just a couple real quick state legislative updates. As you know, last week the state took a break to observe Easter and kicked back into high gear yesterday. Yesterday, the conference committees were appointed, which means today through Wednesday, the committees will work through resolving discrepancies between the Senate and House versions of the bills, including the budget. Whatever is not resolved by Wednesday will then go to the appropriations chairs to be finalized. There's been discussions about the budget. As you know, we have a $1 million request in for our sewer expansion project. Currently, the Senate included $500,000 in funding for that project in their budget. The House hasn't published their list yet. However, when the Senate had initially set aside $43 million for water projects, the House had $100 million for water projects. Just this morning, the Senate offered to increase their amount to $80 million. So that's good news because it increases our chances of obtaining full funding for our $1 million request. We should know within the next 36 hours exactly what it will be. Another piece of good news, the House and Senate versions of funding for the SHIP program, which is very important to our low-income residents, was very far apart, with the House having about $40 million in their version of the budget, and the Senate about $140 million. If we would have gone with the House's version of that in the final budget, our SHIP program would not have been funded this year, and we would have had to shut that down until additional funding would have been allocated in another year. Just today, again this morning, the House agreed to go to the Senate version and increase their number. So our SHIP, we will be able to offer the SHIP program to our residents. Yes, sir.
Is that at the same level, at a higher level?
It's at about the same level. I don't have the exact numbers.
Okay.
I can follow up with that. And then finally, another important state issue for us has been the DJJ legislation, which addressed cost share for juvenile justice detention. All legislation has now been dropped. That's not going to be heard anymore this year, and we'll move forward with the governor's version of the bill, or the governor's version at this point, which is a 57-43 split, with the counties paying the higher share, and then the attorney's office will provide updates on the best way to move through the litigation process that we've been involved in.
Any questions on the state legislative agenda? Commissioner Trix.
Just a couple things to add. As additional legislation, my understanding is the DRI bill, as of this morning, doesn't look like it's going anywhere. So we don't have to worry about that one right now. And I did make a phone call at 8:07 this morning, trying to do what I can to maybe make certain that our ask of $1 million is on the proper committee's list in the proper amount. Reiterated what that was going to do, and offered to answer any additional questions. So I just want to let you guys know I'm still pushing that issue.
Thank you. Commissioner Duffy.
Commissioner Truex, did you get an answer on that?
No, I had to leave a message this morning, but I'll follow up this afternoon. We have a break.
I talked to someone last night about it, and I guess it was on the Senate's list, but they make an offer to the House, and it wasn't on the offer.
The House's list is not published?
No, I mean the Senate, when they make an offer to the House, it didn't make it onto that list, that offer list. But
Well, it's on the House side, so as they conference it, it's important that we get as close to the $1 million as we possibly can, so that there's some room for negotiations, and I'm hoping that they can continue to push that. My understanding right now is that we still have a chance.
okay, and who's pushing it for us? Is it what Senate?
Representative Albritton. He is the appropriations chair for this committee.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Move ahead.
Okay, moving on to the federal legislative agenda. The purpose of this discussion today is to ask that you would consider approving our federal legislative agenda, which outlines important issues and priorities at the federal level. This is used as a tool for us as issues arise. It allows us to address and either advocate for or against an item, because in the topics that are included in the agenda, you formally take a stand whether you support or oppose various aspects of new legislation that's being discussed, such as the Waters of the U.S. proposed rule. Our statement in the agenda is to oppose expansion of what is considered federal waters. So this enables us to advocate without coming back to the board each time an issue arises. It also provides some detailed background on a number of issues that are of importance to the county that serves as a reference for us, and also will be posted online so that our citizens can become familiar with what we're working on, and they can always contact us if they have any questions. Today we have our federal lobbyist, Greg Burns from Van Scoik, in from D.C. to talk a little bit about some of the more important topics that are included in the agenda and to answer any questions that you may have. After he's finished, we would ask that you consider a motion to approve the agenda. And now I'll turn it over to Greg.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Greg Burns with Van Scoik Associates in Washington, D.C. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today and yesterday and enjoy some nice warm weather, since it's still chilly in Washington. You know, sometimes when you look at this document like this, it's very dense. Your eyes can begin to glaze over. You can think, well, geez, you know, all these issues, are they really going to go anywhere? Congress doesn't do anything anyway. And I want to point out that that's really not the case. The reality is that Congress does do things, and that even while Congress is not working, the agencies, those pesky agencies that we sometimes have to deal with, are continuing to do a lot of work. So this does really provide us a good framework from which to, you know, undertake our advocacy activities on your behalf on a day-to-day basis, and does provide us with that sort of, you know, confidence that we can go and advocate on behalf of a certain position, you know, without having necessarily come to you each time prior to, you know, doing anything on your behalf. So with that, though, I do want to point out a couple things in the document that I think are worth noting. Within the document, the first 2 pages are obviously just a cover sheet and sort of intro page. And then the next 2 pages are a nice summary of what's in the document, which is probably about 20 to 25 pages long in total. You know, again, when you look at this and you think, boy, you know, some of these issues, they're just never going to be relevant to us. I'll remind you, for instance, that under the transportation authorization on that second page of the summary document, you may remember that the last year that we had a transportation authorization, the original bill that came out of the Senate actually was going to eradicate metropolitan planning organizations who had populations of fewer than 200,000 people. So in fact, these issues do come up. They do have a real world impact on your community, and that's why we do want to put this in writing so that we can have very clear guidance to move forward and address some of these issues. You know, when I was here last year presenting to you last year's version of the agenda, one of the items that we had tucked in here was related to the flood insurance program. And this was back in March of last year, before really anybody was talking about it. Yet we were very much aware that it was something that was going to be a problem for the county and for Florida in general. So as many of you know, or all of you know, we've spent a lot of time over the past year addressing that issue. It's still a part of your 2014 federal legislative agenda. Congress has acted. The President has signed legislation that in some ways does help address some of the issues that we have, but it doesn't address all the issues. And that's why we're going to have to remain very engaged on this moving forward. A lot of that engagement is going to be with FEMA, because they're the ones now that have to implement the law that Congress just passed, as well as continuing to implement portions of the Bigger Waters Law from 2012 that were not amended by Congress. So there is quite a bit of work that we're going to have to do. Ultimately, we're going to have to work with Congress again to continue to fix the people or to address the situations that were not addressed by Congress in this most recent piece of legislation. So that's going to remain a very critical issue moving forward. Another item that I'll just briefly mention on this document is offshore energy exploration. It's not something that I've spoken with nearly any of you about, But, you know, it's kind of funny how some things start off little domino effects. But Senator Baucus from Montana, former Senator Baucus from Montana, was recently named the ambassador to China. He has become ambassador to China. That opened up a position as the chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, which has now been assumed by Senator Landrieu from Louisiana. She is very much pro-drilling in the Gulf and energy exploration. So we haven't asked you to take a position on this issue, but it does say monitor the potential expansion of offshore energy exploration in Florida's federal waters. So the point is that with her being a very strong advocate for the energy industry, and with her counterpart on the Republican side being Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, also a very strong proponent of offshore energy exploration, it's something that we're going to have to pay really close attention to over the next several months and years, depending on whether or not Senator Landrieu wins her reelection. You know, as on this issue moving forward, though, it very certainly we could have significantly increased energy exploration in the Gulf in the near future. And obviously, without taking a stand on that aspect of the issue, we are very much aware still of the Deepwater Horizon incident, you know, just 4 years ago, that's still having lasting impacts on the Gulf. So we do need to be cognizant of that moving forward. Another issue that, you know, we have had an opportunity to discuss to a limited degree to this point is the Waters of the United States rulemaking proceeding. This is something that is a very technical issue, but as Jason very succinctly said, it's essentially an effort by the administration to clarify in their mind the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act over what bodies of water are so-called waters of the U.S., meaning they're under federal jurisdiction, or well, and therefore are subject both to permitting as well as other criteria, such as nutrient criteria, things like that in the future. So this very much could have a hugely detrimental impact to the state of Florida, in my opinion, as well as you know, many parts of the country, and certainly here in Charlotte County. You know, as we were describing yesterday, you have a stormwater canal, for instance, on which you perform regular maintenance. If that stormwater canal were determined to be a water of the U.S., which we believe in many instances under this proposed rule that it would be, you'd have to go get federal permits in order to do any maintenance activity. That would be a really long, laborious, challenging process, not to mention expensive and very time-consuming. So it's something that we are just beginning to really work with your staff on and put together some very concrete examples of how exactly this proposed rule would impact you locally, which we then can present both to the EPA and the Corps of Engineers as they undergo their rulemaking proceeding. And then we can also work with Congress to inform their decision-making in the future, because certainly Congress will be engaged in this conversation. They already are. But we want to make sure that they're doing, you know, having this engagement with really concrete, tangible examples of real-world impacts, so that they can, you know, more effectively deal with the agencies and hopefully shape this rule in a way that works for everyone. So those are some of the issues, you know, that we have laid out for you in this year's federal agenda. We brought it to you a little later than we have in the past this year. It's really two reasons. One, the flood insurance issue was so hot and heavy that it was very difficult to sort of transition our attention away from that for any length of period. And two, you were then very deep into the legislative session in Tallahassee, so we didn't want to divert your attention from that effort as well. But the last thing that I would point out is that this legislative agenda is really focused on, you know, congressional activity, the legislative activity, and as we know, there is so much more that we do on your behalf in Washington on an annual basis, whether it's just very frequent engagement with your staff on issues of concern or potential concern, as well as, you know, some efforts related to grants. We were just yesterday, or over the past week, have been working with your staff and economic development folks on the Tiger Grant application, to try to, you know, help strengthen that through some of the intelligence that we've garnered from the Department of Transportation. You know, another example is the Habitat Conservation Plan. Obviously, your staff have taken the lead role in managing that through the process, but we have tried to be helpful in working with your congressional delegation to keep them informed and engaged, as well as working with Fish and Wildlife at the same time. You know, in another example,